Hey everyone, welcome back to Strange Minds 6. I'm your host Ruby, and today we are going to be getting back into Beware the Claws That Catch Alice by Christina Henry. And we last left off where Alice and Hatcher were able to escape from that giant wave after Alice actually had to track Hatcher down. But she finally did it, and she overcome her fear of swimming, and she had to fight her thoughts, her intrusive thoughts, because that water was enchanted, she said. But she had to fight those intrusive thoughts, and she did it, and she saved his life. So definitely, if you're just tuning in, I would advise that you start the book from the beginning, because there's a lot of stuff that you have missed out on. But no worries, I actually created a playlist for it. It's just called Beware the Claws That Catch Alice. And without further ado, my dear friends, please grab a snack, grab a drink, or sit back and relax, and let's get to it. Chapter 10. Alice didn't know what he meant. She didn't see any butterflies. There was a large building before them, directly across the alley. This building was strange, a construction of many different styles, all jammed higgledy-piggledy on one another. There were turrets and balconies and staircases that went up into nowhere, and tilted shacks that appeared to have been dropped on the roof of others, stacked up to the sky. Part of the building crept into structures on either side, like a bloated spider spreading its web all through the garden. Alice wondered whether all the parts connected when you were inside. How would you climb up to the highest tower otherwise? It didn't appear that way, though. It looked like another maze to her, a different sort of maze, and she'd quite had enough of mazes. Then she noticed the sign attached to the roof of the porch. It was made of tin and swung back and forth in the evening breeze. Butterflies. Cheshire had delivered them right to the caterpillar's doorstep. Only now they were there. Alice did not want to go up that doorstep. That mad building could only house a mad person. Hatcher's mad, she thought. Yes, but there is no evil in him. She thought back. She didn't know why she thought evil. The building was twisted and weird. But it didn't have to be evil, except that she had that feeling, that same feeling of wrongness that she'd had in Nell and Harry's tavern. The feeling that something bad was before them, and they ought to turn away while they still could. She noticed Hatcher's hesitation also. It's not right there, is it? No, he said, but we must go. He's the one Cheshire said would know about the blade. Cheshire also tried to kill us for his own amusement. Alice said. Why should we trust anything Cheshire says? Because it's all we have, Hatcher said. Alice and Hatcher went to the door of Butterflies. Hatcher pushed it open, and it creaked, like the door of a haunted mansion in a story. Before them was a dusty, musty hallway with several doors. There was no one in the hall, nor was there any indication that anyone might be behind the doors. Hatcher took his axe out of his jacket. Alice found the knife was already in her hand. They shuffled forward cautiously, and the door swung closed behind them with a decisive thud. Alice checked the knob and found that what she'd already suspected. It won't open, she said. She should be frightened. Instead, she was angry. Angry at Cheshire for sending him here. Angry with herself and Hatcher for listening. Anger would not help them escape. Finding that caterpillar would, although she doubted he would know anything about this blade that Cheshire spoke of. She did not believe that such a weapon existed at all, but that Cheshire had sent them here for some purpose of his own. Let's try the doors. One of them must open. Else, how does the caterpillar go about his business? She didn't like to think of his business, but there it was. He sold girls to men, and those men must have a way in and out. It was absurd to think that everyone who entered was unable to leave. Excuse me. Who's unable to leave? How could the caterpillar make money without men to spend it? Hatcher tried the first door on their right. It was locked, as was the one Alice tried on the left. They moved steadily down the hall until they reached the very last one at the end. That was locked as well. What now? She asked. She was not about to stand in the caterpillar's dirty hallway forever. A movement in the corner of her eye made her start. It was a large centipede, disgustingly large, in fact. The insect's length was easily half her forearm, and it was as thick as the little snakes that slithered between her mother's flowers in the garden. She cringed away from it, repulsed. Hatcher followed her eyes. It can't hurt you. How do you know? Alice countered. Roses aren't supposed to grab people and try to murder them either. Alice tracked the movement of the centipede as it moved away from her. It disappeared beneath the door. She had not noticed before, and the reason she hadn't noticed it was because the top of the door was just below her knee. It was a very garish shade of red and had a tiny golden knob. Alice was just about to pinch it between her thumb and first finger. You don't suppose the caterpillar is really a caterpillar? Alice asked, glancing at Hatcher. He shrugged. There are Jabberwocks in the world, why not? And that, Alice thought, was very typical Hatcher logic. The door opened. Noise and smoke spilled out. Alice lowered her head and peered through the opening. Someone's boot blocked the view. The boots were twinned with a woman's bare feet. Very dainty feet, with shell pink nails. Someone banged away at a piano, a discordant tune that made Alice's back teeth ache. Then the boots and feet moved away, clearing the view. There was a very large room behind the little door, a room with many tables. Men sat at the tables, and they appeared to watch something that Alice could not see. Some of the men had women with them, and what they did to those women made Alice shudder and turn away. Decent folk should not do such things with others where others could see. Hatcher nudged her aside so he could have a look. Alice gladly ceded the space to him. She had no wish to see any more. He stood up. There's nothing for it. We've got to get in there. 100 objections were on her tongue, but he shook his head before she could voice them. That's the only door that opened. I could break down the others. I got out of the hospital room, but I don't think that's what we're supposed to do. How do we know what we're supposed to do, Hatch? Alice asked, slumping against the wall. Every time we stop to talk to someone or catch our breath, a traitor tries to take me, or a street soldier tries to kill both of us. We came to this place because Cheshire told us to, but he hasn't exactly been helpful. He told us to come here, and he made sure we did. I only know how to go one way, Alice. Forward. I don't know how to turn back, retrace our steps, start over. I don't even know if we can. Our past was padded and drugged. At least out here we're free. We're not free. We're still dancing to someone else's tune, Alice said, but softly. Hatcher rummaged in the bag and pulled out the cake that he'd presented to Alice earlier. The cake was as pristine as if it lay on a table. Fresh from the cook's kitchen, it should have crumbled, Alice thought. It should have been smashed to bits in the bag. This is what Cheshire gave us, Hatcher said. He told us to come here, and he gave us this. Maybe we're supposed to give it to the caterpillar. Alice said, No, you know that's not who it's for. Alice didn't want to eat it, and she knew that was what Hatcher was saying they should do. What if it makes us sick? Alice said. Alice, my grandmother told you I was a seer, Hatcher said. She frowned at him. You're claiming seer powers want us to eat the cake that Cheshire gave you. Well, no, Hatcher admitted. I just wanted you to go along with me and stop arguing. Hatch, I was the one who knew something was going to happen at the tavern, not you, Alice said. Why should we trust your instincts more than mine? She didn't have time to stop him. He lunged for her, and since Alice trusted him implicitly, it did not occur to her that he might hurt her. By the time she realized what had happened, a piece of the cake was in her mouth and she swallowed it. You! She began. Then everything was spinning, like she was swirling down a drain. When the spinning stopped, she was in front of the little red door. and Hatcher was next to her, grinning. "If we see that centipede again, I'm going to feed you to it," Alice said. She opened the door. The knob fit perfectly in her hand now, and marched through it. Hatcher jerked her out of the way as a shiny pair of men's shoes nearly crushed her. They huddled close to the wall, so far unnoticed by the revelers in the room. "Now what?" she hissed. "We're not going to get anywhere while we're the size of beetles." He pulled a small bottle from his bag and presented it to her. There was a label with a pink rose on it. "Pink liquid slush inside." Alice sighed. She would have liked to ask why Hatcher thought this would make them big again, or why he was so certain of their path. If she asked too many questions, though, he would find some other way to make her drink what was in the bottle. She knew that now. She knew also that even though he loved her, he was not entirely trustworthy. "He's killed people, Alice. Why did you think he was trustworthy in the first place?" He waited, holding the bottle patiently. She took it from him and unstopped the cork. The liquid tasted like rose petals, and she nearly spit it out. It didn't seem to want to go out, though, sliding down her throat and into her stomach before she could expel it. Hatcher snatched the bottle back from her just as the room spun again. This time she could feel her arms and legs stretching, the muscle snapping back into place around her crackling bones. No one seemed surprised by their sudden appearance. No one seemed to notice at all. Now that they were taller, Alice could see what everyone stared at. There were several platforms set up around the room. Each of the platforms was boxed by glass walls, so it was almost as if you peered into a little room. In these rooms were girls, naked girls, with butterfly wings strapped to their shoulders. The girls posed in various positions, all of them suggestive and obviously pleasing to the crowd. The platforms were brightly lit, though Alice did not see how. The rest of the room was dim. The air was thick with smoke, but it was not the comforting pipe tobacco smoke that Alice remembered from her childhood. This smoke was spicy and somewhat sweet, and made her nose wrinkle. The few men who were not entranced by the posing butterflies had naked women with them. These women had elaborate tattoos of butterfly wings on their backs and equally intricate paintings around their eyes and cheeks. The men fondled these women while they sat in their laps. Some had pushed their girls to the table and pounded away between their legs, right out in public. Alice didn't know where to look except the floor. Her legs shook and her hands were knotted in tight little fists. It was horrible, horrible what was happening. Those women made loud noises as if they liked what the men were doing to them. But how could they? How could they like it when it hurt so much? When these men used them and left them here for another man to take? She was screaming, and hot blood ran down the inside of her legs, and she was trying to keep him off her, but he was stronger, so much stronger. Someone touched her shoulder, and she looked down to see a tiny girl whose head came to just the top of Alice's throat. The girl took Alice's hand in hers and guided that hand to a very large breast. "You're shy, I can tell," the girl said, rubbing Alice's hand all over her chest. The swirls painted on her face sparkled in the low light. "Don't be shy. Come with me. I know what to do with shy boys like you." Alice yanked her hand away as if the girl were on fire. The girl pouted, looking insulted. Alice noted her eyes were glazed and strange, and she wondered whether the girl really knew what she was doing. "Am I not pretty enough for you? What about your friend?" the girl asked, sliding around to Hatcher. Alice grabbed the girl's hair before she could do to Hatcher what she'd just done to Alice. Her hair was long and red and beautiful and knotted in a braid down her back so you could see the butterfly wing tattoo carved there. And the tattoos were carved, Alice realized. It was not ink or paint, but scarring. She touched the girl's back, felt the ridge build up there, and the scab that meant the design had recently been retraced. Horrible, Alice thought. The girl interpreted Alice's tug on her braid and the touch on her back to mean something Alice had not intended. She snuggled into the curve of Alice's arm. "Not so shy after all?" the girl asked, rubbing her body against Alice's. Alice looked at Hatcher helpless, hoping for assistance. He stared at the girls under the glass with an odd, hungry look on his face. "He is a man, Alice," she thought, "and even the best of men might be lured by flesh dangled so willingly before them, though you are not, whatever this poor confused creature might think." Alice carefully put her hand on the girl's shoulder, pushed her away. She kept her eyes right on the other girl's eyes because there was nowhere else decent to look. "You're very pretty," Alice said, "but I'm not here looking for a pretty girl tonight. I'm looking for the caterpillar." "Are you sure?" the girl asked and tried to grab at Alice again. "Quite sure." "The caterpillar won't have any truck with you," the girl said, giving Alice an up and down look. "You don't look like you have any flash. He only takes the one with flash in his special room. Let me worry about that. Where is his special room?" The girl pointed at another red door. On the far side of the long room, a large man who bore a distinct resemblance to Theodore, Cheshire's guard, stood there glowering at everyone who approached. "I can suck you for 2 pence, the girl said as Alice tried to move away. "If you don't want to tumble." Alice didn't even know what sucking meant, though she was certain she didn't want any of it. "No, thank you." The girl walked away, muttering under her breath about pocket money. Alice wondered where the girl would have put the 2 pence anyway. She stood in front of Hatcher so that she blocked his view of the butterflies and waited for his eyes to see her again. Alice, he said, like he only just remembered who she was. His look, sharpened, seemed to focus on her mouth. Alice, I haven't had a woman in such a long time. She feared then that he might give her away, that he might try to kiss her. Worse, he might try to kiss another girl, or take what was so freely offered throughout the room. She couldn't bear the thought of Hatcher acting like those other men, these animals so insensate and of their own surroundings. It's not the time, Hatch, she said. She didn't know what else to say. They needed to see the caterpillar. They needed to leave before Hatcher did something he couldn't take back. As they picked their way through the cheering, drinking, smoking crowd, another terrifying thought occurred to Alice. Had Cheshire sent them here to prove that she was nothing but a man's toy, as he said? Had he expected Hatcher to lose his mind? To treat her as the rabbit had done? If so, it was all the more reason to escape this place as soon as possible. Hatcher would regret anything that happened here. She was certain of that, but she was not confident she would be able to stop him. The door to the caterpillar's special room was just beside the last platform. As they reached it, the butterfly inside pressed herself against the glass and pushed one of her fingers inside her body. Alice resolutely turned her head away. She would never be able to sleep well again. Some might think this place full of wonders, but to her it was a house of horrors. Hatcher closed his hand around her elbow, just for a moment, squeezing hard. She didn't know whether he was trying to reassure her or to keep himself under control. The guard at the door gave Alice and Hatcher the same disdainful look as the naked girl who solicited Alice's attention. He was built on the same large scale as the guard at the Cheshire's cottage. There was a resemblance in the face as well. "Off with you," he said. "You even sound like Theodore," Alice said, though she had not meant to say it. She hadn't really thought about the words she would use to convince him to let them in. The guard's brows drew closer together, if that was possible. "Theodore, you know my brother?" "That explains many things, including how Cheshire knows so much about the caterpillar, and perhaps how he knows of others as well. Anyone who enters this room is under this man's eye," Alice thought. "Yes, we met him at Cheshire's cottage. What is your name?" Alice said, just as if she were in her parents' drawing room making a new acquaintance. As long as she kept thinking like that, it was easier to ignore what went on behind her, to shake away the sight of girls on display like slabs of meat at the butcher shop. She didn't look at Hatcher, but she hoped that he was not staring around like a wide-eyed child. She would prefer the dangerous Hatcher, the one who killed a man because that man touched his shoulder. The guard narrowed his eyes at her. "Theobald, are you friends of Cheshire's?" Alice wished she knew what the correct answer was. Did this man like or dislike Cheshire? Would he be more likely to allow them to enter if she said yes or no? "I would not precisely call him a friend," Alice said. "We went to him for advice. He advised you to see the caterpillar," Theobald said. He seemed smarter than his brother. Yes, Alice said. She sensed that the less she said, the better. Let Theobald draw his own conclusions about their business. The caterpillar doesn't like to be disturbed when he's entertaining guests, Theobald said. However, there is no one special with him this evening. He did not immediately move aside, so Alice waited expectantly. Your names? Theobald asked. He held his hands crossed together in front of him. As he said this, he opened one palm and held it flat. Alice stared at his hand, confused for a moment. Fortunately, Hatcher knew what to do. He drew a single piece of gold from his pocket and put it into Theobald's hand. The guard's eyes gleamed. Tell the caterpillar my name is Nicholas, Hatcher said. He didn't offer a name for Alice. The gold piece must have been sufficient not to warrant further pursuit, though, for Theobald nodded at them and slipped into the room. He moved so quickly and efficiently that Alice did not catch a glimpse of the room behind. Now that the guard was out of sight, she realized that her heart pounded in her chest and her legs trembled. She was scared. Scared that the caterpillar would realize she was a girl and put her under glass like his other butterflies. Alice would never get away, not without Hatcher and the things Cheshire had sent in the sack. Her boy disguise had fooled only those who didn't look at her very closely. Don't be afraid, Hatcher said in a low voice. She glanced at him. He seemed much more alert than before, more like the Hatcher he'd been since their escape. Hatcher always had changeable moods. Alice never realized when they were in the hospital how difficult those changes would be for her. In her own room, she could let him rant and walk or pound the walls, and it wouldn't really affect her, particularly since she took the powders, which made everything dull around the edges. Out here, the world was bright and sharp and full of hungry mouths waiting to eat her up. She couldn't afford Hatcher's instability, and she wouldn't leave him either. They were bound together by love and need and other feelings she didn't entirely understand. I've never been a woman, she thought. She didn't mean it like a woman who is a wife and performs wifely duties, like the ones the butterfly girls offered the men who entered the club, but a woman who sat in adult company, who saw the world through an adult's eyes. Her body had grown older, but her mind was still trapped at 16, still unsure of how to act and how to be. She loved Hatcher, but it was a girl's love for her savior. Would she have loved him if they'd met at a garden party or at a ball? Would he have worn a high collar and starched cuffs like her father, and told her about his work as a clerk in his father's law office? And would she have laughed at all the attempts of humor, even when he wasn't very funny, and looked up at him with shining eyes when it was time for dancing? For a moment, it was almost as if she could see them there, dressed like they belonged in the new city, spinning in circles together, like it was a memory of the past and not the ghost of a future that never was or could be. Theobald returned then and beckoned them inside. He returned to his post outside once they closed the door. Like Cheshire's cottage, the caterpillar's special room was extraordinary. It was long on two sides and short on the two ends, and so stuffed with objects that Alice was surprised anyone could walk through the space. The walls were lined with shelves from the floor right up to the ceiling. Every shelf teemed with things. There was boxes made of gold and silver and iron, encrusted with pearls and rubies or emeralds or sapphires or diamonds. There was chalices and cups and leather-bound books, fabrics that glittered and shone, tall glass jars filled with powders and unguents of various colors and consistencies. Caps of different shapes were stacked messily next to piles of exotic-looking feathers taken from the tails of birds that never lived in the city. Every type of sword, dagger, axe, mace, or hammer imaginable was there too, and brightly colored rugs were piled all around, strewn with fat tasseled cushions. It looks like the room of a sultan, Alice thought. Her mother had told her those stories when she was young, adventures in the faraway desert with magic lamps and flying carpets. At the opposite edge of the room lay a man in repose on several of the cushions, further adding to the impression that they were in a room of an Eastern prince. The man, who could only be the caterpillar, inhaled from a long hookah, occasionally expelling smoke in thin clouds from his nostrils. There was something of the caterpillar about him, though Alice thought the name must have come from his use of butterflies. He was long, very long, and lean, and completely relaxed, his eyes drowsy. He stared at two large glass enclosures before him and did not indicate he noticed their entrance at all. Hatcher moved a little ahead of Alice. His hand was tucked inside his coat, though he did not take a weapon out. Alice patted her pocket, assured that her knife was still there. The caterpillar did not appear threatening at all, but something had raised Hatcher's hackles, else he would not be so ready to swing the axe. Alice could not clearly see what the caterpillar was so interested in, though she imagined it must be more butterflies. She heard a splash of water and a fluttering noise like the beating of wings. Her curiosity was roused, and she peeked through the glass as they approached the caterpillar, ready to look away quickly if she saw more of what she'd seen outside. It was not more of the same. It was much, much worse. Chapter 11. Alice approached the glass, her stomach roiling, though she was unable to look away. Behind the glass of one enclosure was a naked girl with iridescent pink butterfly wings. She was very thin, so thin Alice saw her ribs protruding through her white skin. Her eyes were violet, a startling color, but dull and ringed by black hollows. When she saw Alice, she reached her hands toward the glass in supplication, her eyes pleading. The wings were not attached to her shoulders by straps. The girl's back had been cut from the top of her shoulders to the bottom of her rib cage on both sides of her spine. The beautiful butterfly wings were neatly sewn into the exposed muscle. As the girl flexed her shoulders, the wings would beat. Alice pressed her hand against the cage, for that was what it was, and the butterfly matched her palm to Alice's. Her face close to the glass so the caterpillar would not see her. Her lips moved slowly, mouthing two words to Alice. "Kill me." Alice knew suddenly how Hatcher felt, why he showed his love for her by offering to shoot her instead of letting a criminal take her away. She wanted very much to end this woman's pain, to give her the release she desperately needed. The girl turned her face away, and Alice then noticed that she moved with only her arms. Her legs were twisted at the knee, clearly broken by the hand of a human, so that she could do nothing except sit in a jar and flutter her wings for the caterpillar's pleasure. Alice was half afraid to see what was in the next case, but she also wanted to know. The second cage was a tank half filled with water, and an angry mermaid swam in circles inside, occasionally surfacing to glare out at the assembly. Her lower half was comprised of silver scales and fins, and her upper body was that of a woman. Her hair was long and dark and rippled in the water. Alice leaned close to the glass, almost certain that there would be a row of stitches attached to the shiny scales of the woman's waist, but there were nothing that she could see. The mermaid seemed to be exactly that, but that was impossible. Everyone knew that there were no such things as mermaids, no such things as magic either, or monsters that lived in boxes beneath the hospital. No such thing as a cake that makes you small and a drink that makes you big. She must start believing in impossible things, for impossible things kept appearing before her eyes. "She's real," the caterpillar said. His voice was lazy. "My friend, and yours, found her for me in that maze of his." "He's no friend," Alice said, and her voice was harsh. She spun to face the caterpillar, and the knife was in her hand. She wanted to leap upon him and stab out his eyes, make certain he'd never see his precious collection again. The caterpillar made a gentle tutting sound. He seemed wholly unconcerned by the knife. "I think he would be disappointed to hear you say that. He delivered you to my doorstep, did he not? And gave you the means to enter my private kingdom, for you would have not been able to see or enter without my permission otherwise." He took a long inhale from the hookah and continued, "It's quite extraordinary, is it not? The things that magicians left lying about. The mermaid came from a lake in the center of a maze. She would seduce men and inspire them, give them dreams so they could go out into the world and inspire others. Now she belongs to me, and she does as I say when I say it." Alice glanced back at the mermaid, who was close to the glass now, her fingers curled like claws, and her face white as death, but her eyes burned with hate. She knew that the mermaid did not seduce men by choice. This beautiful, extraordinary creature was nothing but a tool for the caterpillar, an oddity to be taken from her tank and presented to the highest bidder. Cheshire replaced her with another creature I found, something very unique that was trapped in a bottle. She was very happy to be set free, and Cheshire ensures she is fed regularly. Not any longer, Alice said, and was pleased to see the surprise in the caterpillar's eyes. You went through the maze and survived the creature. Interesting, interesting. Alice felt she hated that word. Interesting meant that you attracted the notice of men who would hurt you to possess whatever they found interesting about you. She was not as lovely as my mermaid, I admit. I was happy to trade her to Cheshire, mermaids and vorpal blades. The caterpillar's voice drifted off, repeating the words over and over, mermaids and vorpal blades. A blade is why we are here, Hatcher said. Alice noticed he had his axe in his hand, and his knuckles were white around the handle. He didn't care for this any better than she did, and he was riding the edge of his temper. Oh, I know why you're here, the caterpillar said. Cheshire told you, Hatcher said. No, the caterpillar said. He sat forward suddenly, his eyes bright and sharp, and much more aware than Alice had thought. I knew, as soon as I saw her, pretty Alice, a hand in her hair pulling her head back. Pretty little Alice. Pretty little Alice. Her heart seemed to fall away. Her stomach pushed into her throat. She looked at the caterpillar's hands, but they weren't right. They were not large like the man in the shadows. The man at the tea party from her nightmares. The caterpillar wasn't that man, but how did he know? Why did he use those words? The caterpillar stood, unfolded himself to a giant height, towering over both Alice and Hatcher. You want to know how I know? Why your boy's disguise doesn't fool me? It is because of this. The rabbit is a friend of mine. We share so many friends, you and I, little Alice. He reached toward Alice's face to touch the scar on her cheek. She was frozen by her fear. But the tangle of half-formed memory, by the growing terror that nothing would keep her safe from the rabbit. For he had marked her so that everyone would know. His fingers never reached her. Hatcher's axe swung, and the caterpillar's hand was gone. For a moment she was certain that Hatcher had taken that hand from the wrist, but the tall man stood there before her, a terrible smile on his face and both hands folded in front of him. Hatcher appeared bewildered. As though his blows had never missed their aim before, and Alice thought that was probably true. Yes, one must be quick around the Hatcher of Heathtown, the caterpillar said, and gave Hatcher a nod of acknowledgement. No one has ever used an axe so deliciously as you, Nicholas. She is yours, or so you think. I understand. Alice did not wish to have another discussion about who owned her. It might be safer, she realized, to drop the boy disguise and let those they encounter think Hatcher was her caretaker. In the old city, there was very few ways for women to stay alive, and all of them involved a man. She did not, however, need to listen to the caterpillar tell her what Cheshire had already said. "Don't tell me that I belong to the rabbit," she said. "He may have marked me, but I am not his." The caterpillar's smile widened. His face was extremely thin, and so the smile was ghoulish. "It will be very amusing to see you tell him so again. Will you take his other eye and leave him blind, as you wish to do to me?" She must stop feeling surprised, or at least stop showing it on her face. How did he know what she was thinking? Then she knew with complete certainty. "You're a magician," she said, "and Cheshire as well." The caterpillar gave her a little bow, his eyes gleaming. "We recognize our own, do we not?" It was a strange place and a strange time to recognize the truth of what Hatcher had tried to tell her. Yet in the house of horrors, with this hideous, grinning monster before her, she knew it was true. She was a magician. There should have been a sense of wonder or delight or even surprise, but the idea had been working away in the back of her mind ever since it was first presented to her. A magician, and so the reason why Bess said she and Hatcher must find the Jabberwocky and defeat it, for no one else could. Only that is not quite true, is it? There were other magicians, so it was not a question of could but would. Alice was a magician, but one who did not know how to find or use her magic, so she might as well not have been at all. The caterpillar in Cheshire, they used their magic to further their own aims. Nell had said, with tears in her eyes, that the return of the magicians would mean the end of darkness and suffering. She did not know, nobody did, that some magicians had never left, and that they were the cause of the darkness and suffering. Alice didn't know whether the caterpillar could read her face, or whether he used his magic to read her mind, so she pushed her busy thoughts away and tried to make her brain still. She thought of clouds on a summer day, the way they drifted across the painfully blue sky and made those clouds drift across her mind. The caterpillar watched her closely. He nodded. "Very nice, Alice." Alice frowned. She did not want his approval. The caterpillar laughed. "I know you don't care for my approval. That one shot right out from between your eyes, you know, like an arrow. So you can't really see all my thoughts," Alice said. "Only those that are pointed in my direction," the caterpillar said, "including those you would try to hide, for hiding them makes them shine even brighter." He gestured at the mermaid. "She wishes for my death hourly, when my friends come and lay between her thighs. She thinks of how she will gut me with one of my many swords, how she will rip me open bit by bit, how I will scream and beg for mercy when she slices off my member or drives the sword through my arsehole and out of my mouth." Alice shuddered. She did not disagree with this sentiment, for she felt it was certainly deserved, but it made a horrible image. "Yes, horrible," the caterpillar agreed. He pointed at the butterfly. "This one also only thinks of death, but the death she wishes for is her own. Every day she hopes that she will break her neck as I broke her legs. I couldn't do it the same way, you know. I used hammers on her legs, and that would be a very inefficient way of breaking a neck. Much better to twist it, make it quick. Why don't you?" Alice asked, and tried not to think anything he might see. The clouds drifting in her mind became a thick batch of storm clouds, gray and protective. There are some men who like a girl who cannot get away, the caterpillar said. Not that any of them can get away really, but I cater to all tastes. One paid extra to watch me break her in the first place. A wrinkle appeared between his brow. You're quite good at that. I shouldn't have told you how it worked. I can't see a thing now, and him. He jerked his thumb to Hatcher. His mind is in the new city square on Giving Day. All noise, lights, and people running in every direction. Gives me a headache just to be near him. Giving Day, Alice remembered going with her mother to the square to receive their gift from the leaders of the city. Everyone dressed well. All the kids of the new city would be given a small wrapped box in return for good citizenship. Inside, there were always a silver coin stamped with the year and the symbol of the city leader's choice for that year. One coin had a wolf, another a tree, another a bear. All the symbols were meant to mean something about the path the city was taking that year, though Alice never really understood these. She thought these things, but she was careful to keep the clouds in the forefront of her mind, so the caterpillar could not have her memories. Cheshire must not be so adept at reading thoughts, else he would have plucked the fragment memory of Alice taking the rabbit's eye from her as she sat in the rose parlor. I am not interested in your business, Alice said, allowing her disgust to show. She had quite enough of listening to bad men speak. She wanted only to know where to find the blade, so they could leave this place. Do you have what we are seeking? The caterpillar walked to the enclosure where the butterfly was kept. He stroked his finger against the glass musingly. I wish I did, yet, in a way, I am glad I do not, for then he will not come seeking it here. Do you know where it is? Hatcher asked. His voice was rough, and the skin of his face was pulled tight. Alice felt a moment of alarm. The Jabberwocky must be working on him. It would be terrible if he had a fit now. She might be able to defend herself from the caterpillar, but if he called Theobald in to help him. She glanced at the girls in the cages. She would turn her knife on herself, chew out her own tongue, whatever was necessary. She would not allow the caterpillar to put her in a tank for his own enjoyment, and then trade her to the rabbit, for she knew that was what he would do, for someone more interesting. The caterpillar continued to stroke his finger over the glass, gazing at the girl he'd broken inside, with the only one who could have it, since you are meant to find it. It was always moving toward this. She knew that now, for how would she ever be free until she saw him again? The rabbit, Alice said. Caterpillar nodded again. How I will enjoy his face when he sees you again. It's nothing to do with you, Alice said. Why would you be there? The fastest way to the rabbit's warren is underground, the caterpillar said. My paths can take you there. It will be so lovely for you to be reunited with your friend Dor. Will it not? Dor, alive? Alice realized she'd never contemplated the idea that Dor might not be dead. There was a blank hole in her memory. First Dor was there at the tea party, and then she was gone. But if she was alive, then that could only mean her fate had been worse than death. Yes, little Dor, the caterpillar said. I hope you will forgive her now. She was supposed to take the money and leave you behind. But the rabbit, well, you took the rabbit's eye and left her behind instead. Now she scurries like a little mouse to and fro at the rabbit's bidding. A small hand collecting gold from a larger one. It was too much after finding out she was a magician, and that she was to see the rabbit again. It was too much to discover that Dor, at the age of 16, had tried to sell her to a monster. Dor, who was supposed to be her best friend, the friend she'd loved since she was a little girl. The clouds parted and the caterpillar smiled. Ah, you did not know of her betrayal, silly girl. How did you think you ended up in the rabbit's den? Alice began, scrambling to collect her thoughts and hide them again. I suppose I always thought he tricked her, that he cozened her with nice words so that she would come back. Why would a nice girl from the new city be in such a place to begin with? How would Dor have met the rabbit so that he could charm her so thoroughly that she would take her innocent friends into a forbidden place? He was making her feel stupid and slow for not knowing. Why shouldn't she trust a friend, her most wonderful friend in the world? Why wouldn't she want a little rebellion, just a taste of something dangerous? It wasn't supposed to hurt. It wasn't supposed to be scary. Dor had made it sound as though they were going on an adventure she could hold close and remember that night when she snuggled under the covers, safe in her own bed. Of course, she told you that, you nit, the caterpillar said, and he was full of contempt now, peering down his long nose at her. She wanted you to come along willingly. Still, her betrayal turned out all right for you, not like Nicholas. Alice looked at Hatcher. Sweat ran down the sides of his face. He was fighting hard, trying to stay here with her so he could keep her safe. She moved close to him, though. She was afraid to put her arm around him or otherwise show the caterpillar how much she cared. Every action, every word could be used against them. What do you mean? Why, Jenny, of course, the caterpillar said. There was that name again, Jenny. Just the thought of it had nearly driven Hatcher beyond the edge of reason in Cheshire's maze, and here was another who knew this name, knew that it was supposed to mean something to Hatcher. The rabbit lied and said she would be safe, didn't he? The caterpillar tutted. If you can't trust your employer, then who can you trust? Your child was supposed to be forbidden, was she not? Employer? Alice said. Hatcher had worked for the rabbit? Was that why he'd always believed her when she'd spoken to him? Because somewhere deep down the memory of the rabbit was buried? What had Hatcher done for this man? For this monster? Was he a guard dog like Theobald or Theodore? A snatcher of women, stuffing them into sacks. Her Hatcher? The one who had defended her? Who kept her safe from those kinds of men? Child, Hatcher said. As he said that word, he staggered back, like he'd taken a blow to his stomach. Child. Yes, my Jenny. My beautiful girl. His eyes went wide, but not blank. A million memories ran across those gray eyes. Alice could see that they seized him, took his breath, pummeled his heart to pieces. What did he do? Nicholas or the rabbit? The caterpillar asked. He watched Hatcher fall to his knees, gasping for air, and the smirk on his face made Alice want to kill him right then and there without question for mercy. She knew the hatred of the mermaid, the longing for not just blood but pain. The caterpillar was hurting Hatcher, and Alice wanted to hurt the caterpillar. Jenny, Hatcher said. Alice had never seen him like this before. Even when under the spell of the Jabberwocky, she'd never seen him laid low. He knows the story, for it's his own, the caterpillar said, but it's knotted in the snarl he calls a brain, and now he only thinks of one name, Jenny. I know the story too, for the rabbit told me. I collect stories as well as things, you know. Alice waited. He enjoyed the performance and wanted her to ask for more. She would not give him what he wanted, as she had with Cheshire. His eyes flickered with annoyance, but he continued. Nicholas was a bad boy once upon a time. Thought, though not as bad as he would become. He fought and he drank and caused trouble wherever he might. He was big and strong and handsome, and all the bad girls wanted to be on his arm. Don't you think he's handsome, Alice? Hatcher was handsome, she realized, not only to her eyes. He had the kind of bones and dramatic coloring that would attract attention. He was tall and strong, tall enough to make a tall girl like Alice feel small and protected. Girls in the old city would like that. The caterpillar went on, seemingly satisfied by the expression on Alice's face. He made his flash here and there, fighting for money in the pits while rich men laid their bets on him. That's where his nose was broken, Alice thought. One day the rabbit came to see Nicholas fight a man who was so large and unbeatable. He was known only as the Grinder. The Grinder ground his opponents into meat, you see. The caterpillar thought this was very funny and laughed at his joke. Alice waited, practicing patience. Well, for a time it seemed that the Grinder would make a meal out of Nicholas, as he had all the others. But your Hatcher can be unreasonable. Have you noticed? He did not seem inclined to allow the Grinder to win. When it was over, Nicholas's nose was pushed to one side, and his eyes were nothing but puffed up slits in his face. But his boot was on the Grinder's chest, and the Grinder would not get up again. The rabbit wanted a fighter of such spirit for himself. Nicholas was not inclined to agree. He knew what kind of man the rabbit was, and what he did to women. Nicholas was better than men like the rabbit and me, wasn't he? The caterpillar's voice became harsh. Though he would, though he could climb out of the mud he'd been birthed in, so he said no. But the rabbit, he does not hear no. He thinks there is always a way, always a price. And do not fool yourself, Alice. There is always a way, always a price. Everyone can be bought. The rabbit found Nicholas's price with Hattie. Hattie was one of the rabbit's girls. Her eyes were sad and blue, just like yours. Only there was no fight in them anymore. All the fight had gone out of her years ago. Nicholas saw her, and he wanted that sadness to go away. He wanted to fix her. When the rabbit came around with Hattie on his arm, Nicholas offered his service for her freedom. Now that was her Hatcher, Alice thought. That was exactly the sort of thing he would do. The rabbit wanted a good fighter more than a used-up girl. He could get another girl any place, and considered that he'd gotten the better of the bargain. Nicholas married Hattie and took her away and kept her safe, and when the rabbit had a person who needed persuading, he would send Nicholas. Soon enough, they had a bouncing baby girl with black hair and gray eyes, the image of her father, and they called her Jenny. And as the girl grew older, she was prettier every day. And even as a young thing, people would say she would grow up to be beautiful. When Nicholas heard that, he started to worry, for a beautiful girl in the old city draws too much attention. He asked the rabbit to send out word that she was not to be harmed, that she was under his protection. And the rabbit promised he would. But the girl grew older, and at 10 she was so pretty, too pretty to waste, in Nicholas and Hattie's little hovel. A girl like that, so fresh and new and lovely, would fetch a glorious price. The rabbit wanted to keep her for himself, but he didn't want to tempt fate. He had seen Nicholas when he was angry. One night, when Nicholas was about the rabbit's business, the rabbit sent 6 men to his house. One of them took Jenny away. The other 5 kept themselves busy with Hattie, waiting for Nicholas. They were so rough in their play that she expired before Nicholas came home. When he returned, he found his daughter gone, his wife raped and murdered. The neighbors heard the noise coming from inside the house, saw the blood running free under the door and into the street like a river. When the coppers came, they had to send 20 men to pry the axe from his hand. Nicholas was taken away, but he was not dead, and the rabbit did not wish for the Hatcher of Heathdown to return for him one day. So he sold Jenny to a traveler from the east, who took her through the forest and over the mountains and far away, so that he would be safe. If Hatcher ever returned, the rabbit would be safe, for only he knew the identity of the man who had taken her. "Except he won't be safe," Hatcher said, his voice like a blade against the grindstone. He rose to his feet and his eyes burned. Even Alice, who loved him, who knew his heart, was afraid of him. This was the hunter, the Hatcher, the butcher who slaughtered without fear of consequence. "He won't be safe," Hatcher repeated, "for I will find him, and I will strip the flesh from his bones piece by piece. There is no place the rabbit can hide, no hole he can disappear into. I will not sleep again until I have heard him scream for mercy he will never receive. The caterpillar clapped his hands. Wonderful, wonderful. Yes, there will be so much to see when the two of you meet the rabbit again. That was when Alice lunged. And that is the end of chapter 11. My dear friends, tune in next video to hear what happens to the caterpillar. This has been Ruby, signing off.